Hi, I'm Joe, and today Epic Reads and I have an incredible dystopian book haul for you. From new releases to some classics to some authors that you know and love, this lineup has a great variety with some really important overarching topics. First up, we have Lily Braun Arnold's debut novel, The Last Bookstore on Earth. This is a young adult science fiction where Earth is already in an apocalyptic state. There was a storm that tore apart civilization as you and I know it, and teenage Liz decided to seek shelter in the place where she currently worked, and that is in a little bookshop in suburban New Jersey. And there, presently, she is able to get by trading books for supplies from other survivors, but things get even worse for Liz when she realizes that another terrible storm is on its way. That's when another teenage girl named Maeve breaks into the bookstore in search of shelter. So obviously this brings the beginning of their relationship to a really rocky point. She's breaking into Liz's, essentially her new home. However, they quickly discover that keeping each other around might just be useful and the smart move, because while Liz can provide Maeve with the shelter she's clearly looking for, Maeve can also help Liz by repairing the shelter that they're currently living in, this bookstore, before the next storm strikes. And as their dynamic evolves, they discover that there might just be more dangers to worry about than the storm itself, and they have to figure out what this means for their survivability and their new relationship. Next up, we have a prequel to The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. This is called Sunrise on the Reaping. And this one is about Hamish Abernathy, who we know from the original trilogy as the mentor of both Peeta Mellark and Katniss Everdeen. In this one, Hamish is chosen as a tribute for the 50th Hunger Games, and that means he is being sent off into an arena to fight other children to the death until only one child, who is the winner, the survivor, remains. And there's an awful twist to Hamish's game, as if the Hunger Games aren't terrible enough. It is the 50th, so that means it's one of the quarter quells, and to make it special and unique, for this quarter quell, they are sending in double the amount of tributes. So that means instead of 24 children fighting to the death, it is now 48. So with the odds of survival being even slimmer than a typical Hunger Games, Hamish has to decide what he's willing to do, what parts of himself he's willing to change, and what exactly there is left for him to fight for. And considering how much I just absolutely adore the rest of this series, I am assuming that this will be a 5-star read for me, and mostly I'm just excited to learn more about this iconic character's backstory. Walking Into Worlds by Wab Kiinu is the first in its series, and it is a YA sci-fi fantasy centering around an indigenous teen girl named Bugs. In the real world, Bugs is reserved and shy and is dealing with all sorts of very normal teenage stressors. But in the virtual world, she has this confident alter ego who exists in a video game universe. Enter Feng, whose life has just been flipped on its head. Originally from China, his family became concerned about potentially him having extremist views due to his time spent online, and so they sent him to live with a family member on the res. Both in the real and virtual world, Bugs and Feng bond over having this love of gaming and having these tumultuous relationships with their families. And together they have to reconcile these vastly different parts of their lives, the traditional versus the mainstream, the real versus the virtual, take down threats that rise against them. Next up, we have a classic science fiction book. This one is 1984 by George Orwell. And in this imagined future, the reader is thrust into a perpetual war driven by a totalitarian superstate. There is a dictator who forces omnipresent government surveillance and constantly forces propaganda to the general public, criminalizing independent thinking. We do meet Winston, who is a government employee who also hates the government and dreams of rebellion. He does enter into an illegal relationship with a colleague named Julia. So will their relationship survive this power structure? Will they be discovered? If so, what are the consequences to that? As someone who missed out on reading this in high school because I moved midway through, curriculums are different state to state, I'm really glad to finally be adding this to my personal library. Staying on the theme of 1984, this is Julia by Sandra Newman. It is a retelling that was released 75 years after 1984 and is now considered to be its companion novel. We do get to delve deeper into Julia's character, and when we first meet her, she doesn't really believe in anything in particular, doesn't really care about politics. She is someone who will break the rules when she can, but also work for the regime when she is expected to. And then we know she meets Winston, and this meeting begins a slippery slope. So Julia has to decide if she still has the will and the means and the strength to navigate this terrifying world. Watch Me by Tahereh Mafi is a spring 2025 release. It is a YA sci-fi fantasy that takes place 10 years later in the Shatter Me universe. So a decade ago, a rebellion occurred, and things have been pretty quiet ever since. Enter James, who is the brother of Aaron from the Shatter Me series, and he is trying to infiltrate the last refuge of the previous authoritarian regime. What James doesn't know is that this regime is ready to make another move. They have enlisted a young woman named Rosabelle, who is an assassin that has never hesitated to follow through on her orders. With two characters at such opposite ends of the political spectrum, an enemies to lovers journey commences, and it forces us to consider the question, who are we when no one else is watching. From the author of Lady Macbeth and A Study in Drowning comes Ava Reed's newest book. This is Fable for the End of the World. It is a standalone YA sci-fi fantasy that is destined for people like me who love things like The Last of Us and The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. In this world, there's a single corporation that controls all aspects of society, and it has risen to this point of power by accumulating enormous amounts of debt from the general public and those citizens. We meet a young woman named Anessa who lives in a rough part of town with her brother, and unfortunately for her, her mother has accrued so much debt that their family now qualifies to send one of the children in it to this thing called the Lamb's Gauntlet. This is the corporation's live-streamed assassination spectacle, but Anessa does have one thing going for her, and that is that she's had plenty of practice surviving. There is another character that the story focuses on, and her name is Melinoy. She is one of the assassins employed by the corporation and has yet to fail in any of her assassination duties. But as the Lamb's Gauntlet begins, Melinoy has a lot to prove, and Anessa is determined to stay alive. They have to figure out if there's more to life than just surviving, if they're capable of more than they previously thought, and if they might just so happen to be falling in love with each other. Last on our dystopian book haul list today is Songlight by Moira Buffini. This is the first book in the Torch trilogy, a YA sci-fi fantasy series. We meet Elsa, who is a young woman who is gifted with something called Songlight, but she does her best to keep it a secret because those who are discovered to have Songlight are labeled as unhuman. Now something brings Elsa's world to its knees. One terrible day, she's unsure who to turn to when suddenly a girl appears. But she's not physically there though, it's her Songlight that's been called to Elsa and her overwhelming emotions. They do end up forming a friendship and discover their huge differences, like Elsa lives in this quiet seaside village, and Nightingale, this other girl who has the power of Songlight, calls a city hundreds of miles away home. Between their new star-crossed relationship, Nightingale's relationship with her own father, whose job is to root out these unhumans, and the girls discovering the extent of their powers, they end up finding themselves in a war that is determined to exterminate people like themselves. And that wraps up today's dystopian book haul. Be sure in the comments down below to let us know what book you're currently reading, which books from this haul you are adding to your TBR list, and be sure to follow Epic Reads for more epic videos like this, and we will see you in the next one. Bye!